Welcome to IQT Explains, a series on the IQT podcast where we explore technology trends and their impact on national security. I'm your host, Russel Ross. Today, I'm excited to discuss the importance of electricity to the U.S.'s run in the global AI race and a novel pathway to powering the growth and deployment of AI data centers. In just a few years, U.S. data centers have grown to roughly 4.5% of national electricity demand, and forecasts now say they could at least double that share, reaching as high as 17% by 2030, with hubs like Virginia, where we're recording this episode, on track for data centers alone to consume half of the statewide available electricity. The U.S.'s lead in the global AI race is now colliding with a very physical constraint: availability of power. Even with access to capital and compute, new data center projects are being slowed by grid access, with multi-year interconnection queues and long lead times to bring new electrical infrastructure online here in the U.S. For IQT, this is a national security challenge. It's why we invested in Emerald AI, whose software platform is designed to make AI data centers more flexible partners to the electric grid, providing a faster path to powering data centers. Joining me here today via VTC is Emerald AI's founder and CEO, Dr. Varun Sivaram. Welcome, Varun.
Thanks for having me, Russ.
News in Emerald AI land. I hear you've closed a round recently.
We are super excited to have just closed our Series A. We're announcing it this week. And thanks to IQT for being a core investor in us now for the second time. We're now valued at over $1 billion, and we're delighted to bring on some fantastic investors.
Oh, that's fantastic news. Very exciting. So maybe we can get back to the topic at hand, and you can help me to set the stage a little bit. What do you believe is strategically at stake if the U.S. is not able to scale AI infrastructure fast enough?
Russ, there's no bigger strategic topic than the AI race. Let's be clear, we are locked in a race, particularly with China, the country that is able to move quickly in AI. And I continue to hope that the United States stays at the frontier. If we stay at that frontier, we will be able to lead on cyber defense, on intelligence gathering, on the capabilities of our military and national security establishment, and of course, in the development of our economy, which increasingly our GDP, just as the electricity share is moving to AI, our GDP will move toward AI. By mid-century, I'd be surprised if less than half of our GDP wasn't directly linked to artificial intelligence. Given all that, this is not a race we can afford to lose. But Russ, as you and I have talked about, we're seeing a limit, a physical limit that is facing the United States, and it's not facing China. China has 400 gigawatts of spare available peak capacity headroom. That's another way of saying that China can power as many data centers as they want. And they're not bounded by power, they're not bounded by land. They are, as we know, bounded by their chip supply, but they're quickly investing in homegrown chip design and manufacturing capabilities. The United States is not bound by chip supply. Silicon is not our constraint. Land really isn't our constraint. It is power. Over the next 3 years, between now and 2028, the United States and our private entities want to build 50 gigawatts of data centers, but we're only going to be able to bring 25 gigawatts online, according to S&P Global. And that gap, that 50% of what we should be building is getting built in the next 3 years, that gap is going to widen. Are we going to hit 17% of our grid coming from AI? I don't know, because our grid right now is very stressed out. That is the limit. And as we've seen very clearly over the last 3 years, the more compute you have, the better your frontier models are, and the more you're able to use AI throughout your economy. There's no choice but to win this race, and we're at danger of slipping if we don't solve this energy crunch.
It's fantastic. Very passionate. I love it, Varun. What is the misunderstood aspect of how AI, the energy ecosystem, and this new thing, data center infrastructure, how are they interacting today? And what is that misunderstood aspect that's missing?
I mean, that in itself, Russ, is the misunderstanding. They really don't interact today. It's wild. But data centers, historically, just like many other loads, they just kind of expect the grid to be there. They will compute, which means they'll ramp up and down their GPUs, graphics processing units, to run artificial intelligence training and fine-tuning and inference, as if the grid was a background entity that was just always there for any of their needs. Historically, while data centers were a small 1 or 2% share of the American electricity grid, that worked just fine. There was plenty of power. And so when a data center connected to the grid, you could over-provision the grid and say, don't worry, no matter how much power you use within the 100 megawatt envelope of that building, we'll always be there to support you. Just like you, Russ, when you walked into that podcast studio today, you turned on that light, or someone turned on that light. You never thought about whether the grid was ready to give you that power. But we're running into limits now, where there simply isn't enough capacity on the transmission lines and the power plants to over provision, so that at any given moment, you can do absolutely anything you want in the data center and just expect it to be there. We can't build as many data centers as we need and hold to that condition of not interacting. That's what Emerald's here to solve. Emerald is here to create the interaction layer between the data centers and the power grid, and make the data centers more flexible and controllable power assets so that they can be aware, hey, 99% of the year, there's plenty of grid power available. This is another misunderstood aspect. Think of the grid as a highway. And most of the time, you're not facing rush hour. You actually only see rush hour once or twice a month for a couple hours. And so the rest of the time, that road is relatively empty and you have plenty of power. The problem arises when on that peak rush hour, you have an 18-wheeler, a massive data center, the size of Miami, that wants to draw their full capacity. That's when, if data centers can be a little bit flexible, controllable in their power consumption during those rare moments, 1 or 2% of the year, well, then we could fit so many more data centers onto our grids. We could actually fit 100 gigawatts, according to research from Duke University. So if I go back to those statistics, we're trying to build 50 in the next 3 years. We can only build 25. But hey, there's 100 gigawatts of capacity just lying around on the grid almost all of the year that's available. If we built that interaction layer, we could take advantage of it. And so Emerald was founded in order to unstrand all of this existing capacity on the grid by making data centers respond to what the grid needs and controlling the power during those rare moments.
That kind of harkens back to a lot of these ideas about right sizing, right? We hear this in hybridization and those strategies. It seems like very much you're right sizing that data center for what's happening, what's occurring in real time. However, these data centers, they have a variety of different workloads. How do you control for that? How do you orchestrate what gets done now versus what gets done later?
Let me come back to that question, Russ. It's so important to figure out, how do we make a data center flexible? But first, let me just answer the point about right sizing. I really want to make it clear that this is a both and situation. We need to build out our energy system, and we need to supercharge the deployment of AI data centers. And if we try and do them both, but all the data centers are inflexible, our grid will never keep up. And actually, we'll be so heavily over-provisioned on the grid side that we will just raise every community's power bills, and there will be a huge political backlash. And that's bad for everyone, not least America's AI competitiveness. Because AI needs to be a whole lot more popular than it is today if we're going to compete with China. We need the support of our citizenry. So we're going to be building out power grids and power plants, just not at an exorbitant rate, but rather at a prudent way. And we're going to be building out AI data centers as fast as humanly possible, but we'll make them flexible so that they can accommodate the existing grid and utilize it better. Now, how do you make a data center flexible? The key framing shift for me is to think about AI not just as a sink or a liability on the grid, but as a real asset. In fact, I think of AI as an energy technology in its own right. Russ, you and I, before this podcast, we were chatting and we were talking about what our favorite energy technology was. We talked about nuclear and undersea tidal turbines, and we talked about hamsters on wheels. Believe it or not, I believe data centers are also an energy technology, just like those other things, like the nuclear energy plant or the battery. Because if the data center's use of energy can be precisely controlled and monitored and flexed, it turns out to be the same sort of thing as a virtual battery or a virtual power plant. It's doing similar services for the power system. It's an asset, a resource. Now, how do you make a data center flexible? How do you put it so there's a knob you can put on that data center, like a Nest thermostat, and you can turn it left and right, and the data center's power goes up and down controllably? Well, there are three ways. The first way is within the data center itself, the computations that it's running, you can slow them down. You can pause them. This is called temporal flexibility. Emerald reaches all the way down into the GPUs, and we modulate the clock frequency, for example. We downclock them, or we pause certain jobs, or we change the number of GPUs working on a job just for a temporary amount of time. This is called temporal flexibility. The second way that you could do this is what's called spatial flexibility. You can take a job that's running over here in Virginia, where you and I are, and you can move it across the country, let's say to Chicago, and you can move it in the matter of milliseconds. That spatial flexibility means, Russ, if you're talking to ChatGPT and you want your answer right now, you're going to get it right now. It'll be milliseconds late, but you won't even notice. You won't have blinked. So that's spatial flexibility. And the third way of achieving flexibility is to run some energy resources on site. Maybe you've got a battery or a generator. You can run those energy resources so that you reduce the amount of energy you're drawing from the grid for that temporary moment when you're facing peak rush hour. And so you've taken that 18-wheeler, the data center, during peak rush hour, and you've shrunk it down to, a Cadillac Escalade. That's a much more palatable vehicle on the road at that time. And the rest of the time, you can be your 18-wheeler on that empty road, and you don't have to build out a brand new lane of that road, because that's what costs a ton of money and raises everybody's power bills. So you asked which workloads are in fact flexible. Well, some workloads can be slowed down. These might be a fine-tuning run or a batch inference. What does that mean? That's where you're asking an AI model to give you some kind of an answer. Maybe it's, telling you the structure of a protein molecule, and you're okay with getting that answer not in the next second, but in the next hour, or the next 24 hours. Those are temporally flexible workloads. And there are other cases where they're spatially flexible workloads, like inference queries, your query to a chatbot, Russ, where we can move them and really don't take up much of your time waiting around for the answer. So we take these aspects of flexibility together with the limited energy resources we might have on site, like a battery, and we put it all together. The Emerald Conductor software platform is the operating system at a data center that makes it a grid ally, a flexible power user. We control batteries, we control the workloads, we slow them down, we move them, and we just make sure that whatever's happening underneath, the customer is very happy with the service that they're getting. They're getting the AI computations done at the rate they need, while the data center is also precisely meeting what the grid needs.
Thanks for explaining that. That's really interesting. My understanding is you've done quite a few, or Emerald, the team there, has done quite a few demonstrations of the technology. As a result, what are those measurable results that matter most to your customers?
It's a great time for us to be talking as we close our Series A, because we've just exited what we call the demonstration phase, where we've done 5 demonstrations in 5 data centers all over the world: London, Portland, Phoenix, Chicago, Virginia. And we've moved into the commercial scaling phase. I say commercial scaling because as of right now, as I'm talking to you, we are deployed in a multi-megawatt data center. And later this year, here in Virginia, we will be deployed at 100 megawatt, world's first commercial power flexible AI factory or data center that NVIDIA and Digital Realty are building. We're going to make it power flexible with those key partners. And so I just want to share a great quote that came out of one of the runs yesterday, when the local grid operator said, we're going through one of those rush hour moments. We need you to reduce by a certain amount of power for a limited amount of time. And the whole team was gathered in the conference room to see what would happen, because our AI agents were in the data center across thousands of GPUs, autonomously answering the call. We weren't doing anything. We were just watching. And it felt kind of like a SpaceX launch. I don't want to exaggerate. A SpaceX launch is way harder. But what our head of product, Mansi Shah, said, she said, today felt like a space watch party. And here's my quote: "One small curtailment for a data center, one giant leap toward making power flexible AI a reality."
That's fantastic.
So that's what it felt for us in Mission Control yesterday in California. And, I just can't wait to bring this to larger and larger data centers. You asked Russ, hey, what do people care about? The two sides care about different things: the grid and the AI computing customers, right? The grid wants to make sure that when you hit one of those rush hours, everybody's running their air conditioning in Phoenix, you're able to reduce the power of this massive 18-wheeler data center. Or they care about, if lightning strikes, That data center is able to respond within seconds to help bring the grid back into balance. Or they're in the Pacific Northwest. We ran this demo with NVIDIA and Portland General Electric, where we showcased during a heat dome, this 24-hour event or 8-hour event, we're able to provide sustained, lasting support to the grid, even while resources are really under strain. So that's what the grid cares about. They can ask for something and you very precisely respond. So what do the AI customers want? Well, they want more power, they want more chips, they want more compute. So the incentives are very aligned. And also they want to make sure that if they say, I've got a high priority job, it can't be slowed down or it can't be moved, that we respect those constraints. And we are only throttling jobs or tasks that have a little bit of flexibility built in. And so Emerald's patented pioneering technology, the Emerald Conductor platform, really respects the customer constraints and assures what we call quality of service for the customer, while at the same time precisely meeting what the grid needs it to do.
Well, the value proposition's definitely there. Maybe we can start to talk a little bit about what does it look like as Emerald steps forward? What are those barriers that need to be overcome? This is infrastructure, and infrastructure usually takes a long time, right? Not just to deploy software on it, but to garner trust in that software to be deployed on the infrastructure. And then, you're also dealing with utilities and regulators that have to trust the information feed from your platform. Maybe we can talk a little bit about, how are you going to develop that trust? How is it going to roll out over time?
When I started this company, there was one key thing that I was focused on, and now it's morphed into 3 different key things that keep me up at night. The first one is, does the technology work? I kind of assumed if you found a company, that's the thing you focus on, right? Can we just make sure that this Emerald Conductor thing works? I still lose a little bit of sleep there, but I think the technology is production hardened and ready to go. The second fear is, what if we get attacked? Emerald happens to sit at the intersection of 2 multi-trillion-dollar networks, Russ. We are at the AI data center grid network, and we're at the energy system and power grid network, which means if an adversary tries to get into one of these critical infrastructure networks, when they choose Emerald, that's their vector. And so we spent a lot of time, we have a marvelous head of security, and we work very closely with our customers to go through all kinds of penetration testing scenarios to make sure that this is a very secure solution for both the data centers to be flexible and the grid to communicate with data centers and get what they want from the data centers. Thing 3 is, can we get the regulations, the policies to change to make this win-win-win-win solution possible? Why do I say win-win-win-win? Everybody wins. You get more AI data centers right now to advance American innovation and competitiveness. People's power bills, they don't rise as quickly because these flexible data centers help you avoid building out that extra lane on the highway. The grid becomes more reliable. And that's important because as grids come under strain from weather, from data centers, et cetera, data centers actually become an asset, not a liability. And 4, I actually think it's possible to integrate more clean energy because flexible data centers are capable of responding to variable, intermittent, clean energy generation. So this win-win-win-win doesn't come automatically, unfortunately. It requires regulatory change. And that change is electric utilities and regulators need to offer a new kind of deal to data centers. They need to say, hey, if you're willing to be flexible, we will get you a power connection that's bigger, that's faster, something that's worth your while to invest in this technology and become flexible. That deal today exists in only one part of the country. It's Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley Power, our first partner on the utility side, now offers this deal. They say through their flexible load interconnection program, if you are a flexible data center, we'll get you more power much more quickly, thanks to your willingness to be flexible. Around the world and around the country, we should be able to get these data centers connected faster. It's an uphill battle, though, because regulations have never allowed for this, that you get to jump the line. You get a, what do you call it, a Disney fast pass or lightning lane. And otherwise, you wait 12 years in line to get connected to the grid if you're not willing to be supportive and flexible.
I really enjoy the Disney Fast Pass, so that certainly resonates with me. What is the biggest practical difference for Emerald's approach that's going to make an impact on AI data centers in the U.S. over the next few years?
When I think about the community opposition against AI, folks treating these AI data centers as villains, I think the biggest practical impact we could have right now is to turn them into heroes. It's to say to a community, hey, you're worried that your power bill is going to go up. You're worried that these data centers are going to come and take all the power. And instead, if the data center comes in and is flexible and supportive to the grid, because you avoid building out that additional lane of the highway, it actually helps to pay for local residents' power bills. It helps to, pay for the fixed cost of the network that normally shows up on your bill. And it helps to stabilize your grid so you don't have blackouts. That kind of responsible behavior is, I think, a key element of turning the narrative and getting communities to accept data centers. This is happening at a local, state, and national scale. I'll give you an example. In August, Governor Greg Abbott in Texas put a pause on connecting data centers to the Texas ERCOT grid. He said, I want to do an audit, a review of every single one of these data centers and figure out whether they're doing right by their communities. Reasonable thing to do. And every single one of these data centers now needs to go back and say, hey, how am I actually helping the community? Not just in a lip service kind of way. This is a really good way of doing it. All right. So practically helping to build trust with communities that a data center is actually there to help them, help to fund their local power grid, their local community, make their grid more reliable. That's what I want to achieve, a narrative shift for data centers. And of course, along the way, if that works, and we get communities supporting AI. AI polls, by the way, horribly, polls worse than any presidential candidate you've ever heard of. If we get AI to be more popular, that is the prerequisite for America to be an AI leader. Because we can't keep building these data centers and winning at the frontier of AI for our military and our national security and intelligence objectives unless we have broad population support for it. This is one of those critical ways to do it.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there other aspects that, we need to be thinking about generally whenever it comes to the AI data center deployment here in the U.S.? If we're to get this right, what needs to change operationally, either utility-wise, regulatory, or other?
Both sides, the utilities and the data centers, have to reimagine the way that they operate. The utilities have to say, look, I'm not just going to offer one single one-size-fits-all product. Either you have power and you get it 100% of the time, or you don't have power. Rather, I'm going to offer multiple products. I'll offer you the Disney Slow Pass, which means you wait around 12 years and get a 100% firm connection with the grid. Or you connect in 6 months in the lightning lane, and you're going to be a little nicer to the grid, and you're going to modulate your power based on what the grid needs. So that's a change on the utility side. And then there's a change on the data center side. The data centers have historically operated as if, hey, I don't really need to care about the grid. I'm just going to operate the way I want to operate based on what computing I need to do right now. And if they can change that paradigm and say, you know what, I want to be in that Disney lightning lane. I am going to control my compute capacity during the rare moments when we're facing peak rush hour. Look, Disneyland always has peak rush hour, but the grid, which is our superhighway, doesn't face rush hour that often, right? So the lightning lane gets you into the doors of the park, and then you get to do all the rides you want, right? This is the lightning lane to get into Disney to begin with, to get connected to the grid. And now that I've tortured that metaphor, my summary point is the utilities need to work differently, the data centers need to work differently, but the prize is $4 trillion. That's 100 gigawatts of AI infrastructure built now and not in 12 years. And the prize really is American supremacy and competitiveness in AI.
Wow, that's a nice foot stomp at the end there. We're getting up on time, so any final short thoughts regarding energy and AI that you'd like to leave our audience with?
IQT is such a leader in the national security space. I hope some of the folks that are listening to you are some of our folks in uniform, some of our folks in our national intelligence agencies, our national security community, and around the world with our allies, like the United Kingdom, where we did a major demonstration in London, for example. And we have investors and allies in Canada, in Japan, in Australia. And I hope if these folks are listening to this, they hear not only that power flexible AI is a civilian technology, but they hear that it's a dual use technology as well. Power flexibility is really just a capability. It's a tool, and you can use it in so many ways. You can use it for a civilian data center to get connected to the grid faster. Or you can use a power flexible AI data center that's on a naval ship that can handle a fluctuating power envelope, because that ship may have a fixed amount of power, but lots of varying other uses of power. And the data center needs to use the rest of it. And the only way to handle it is to be able to handle power flexibility, which is what Emerald builds. Or if you're in a forward operating environment or theater, and you might have an unreliable power supply or grid, power flexible AI is going to be critical. Look, AI is going to be the fundamental component, Russ, of our intelligence and military and civilian capabilities. It is the base. That intelligence layer is the base on which everything is built. Making it power flexible enables it to interact with the physical world, the power grid, no matter where it is. If you're an intelligence agency and you want to get a data center connected much more quickly to advance America's capabilities or our allies, the United Kingdom, etc., this is the technology to have. That's what I want to leave your listeners with, Russ, because IQT is a leading beacon of what can innovation do for you? Well, this is what it can do for you. It can get you AI faster in every environment you can think of.
Varun, that was fantastic. Really bringing home the dual use piece of Emerald AI and why In-Q-Tel finds value in what you're doing.
Thank you, Russ.
And thank you for listening to this episode of IQT Explains, a series on the IQT podcast. Subscribe for more, leave us a review, and visit IQT.org to learn how tech is shaping national security.
If you guys accidentally caused a power outage in your home, what would have been the reason?
I shorted out the breaker panel. I'm always breaking into it.
Yeah, I actually just caused this to happen, and it's because I stuck my wife's hairdryer into the wrong outlet. So, yes, spent a lot of time with the breaker panel last night.